Not every breakthrough changes the world, some just change the headlines, until the truth catches up, and the road to the future is littered with the wreckage of miracle cures and perpetual motion machines. Futurism is the art of anticipating tomorrow, but to do it well, we have to be honest about yesterday, and that means facing a difficult truth. Not every breakthrough was real, and not every genius was honest. Throughout history, science has been our greatest tool for understanding the universe and improving our lives. But for every real discovery, there is a shadow, some bit of nonsense wrapped in a lab coat and paraded as progress. It is the nature of science that we spend a lot of time being wrong. Futurism too. But there's a line between legitimate science that's made a mistake and a scam, albeit the line can be blurry in some cases. These scientific scams range from the tragically misguided to the willfully fraudulent, from miracle cures that never cured to machines that claim to break the laws of physics. Sometimes the people behind these claims believed them, other times they knew better. But in all cases, they left behind a trail of broken trust, misdirected resources, and delayed progress. And for those of us who try to predict the future, that matters more than you might think. Because futurism doesn't just depend on imagination, it depends on evidence. When the evidence is faked, exaggerated, or misunderstood, it leads us down the wrong path. Cold fusion wasn't just a scientific embarrassment, it was a detour that shaped energy policy and public opinion for decades. So today, we are exploring the great scams of science, not just to shake our heads at the past, but to better understand how we tell science from pseudoscience, how good intentions can turn into bad theories, and how even the smartest minds can sometimes get it very, very wrong. With that in mind, we'll be examining cases from the past, not the present or recent times, as many current examples are still too emotionally charged to let us see more clearly into the murky seas of the future. And speaking of that, don't forget to like and subscribe to get alerts to more of the future and futuristic content. Grab a drink and a snack, and let's dive in. The roots of scientific deception. Before they were frauds, they were believers. Science, as we know it, is a relatively young invention. While humans have always sought to explain the world around us through myths, philosophy, or observation, it's only the last few centuries that we try to systematically test our ideas against reality, to perform careful experiments and ones that can be repeated by others and form theories that were falsifiable. The scientific method gave us a way to separate what works from what merely sounds good, but it also gave us something else: trust. That trust is powerful. It lets us build on each other's works, innovate faster, and tackle bigger challenges. But it's also a vulnerability, because when someone misuses it, whether through sloppy methods or outright fraud, the damage spreads fast. We are living in a time where public trust in science has taken a pounding, and a lot of that comes from genuine bad scientific practice, as well as folks who benefit from exaggerating instances of that to sell products or ideas that wouldn't hold up to scientific inquiry and thus would like to erode people's confidence in that inquiry. It is important to recognize that not all scientific deception begins with bad intent. Often it starts with excitement, a pattern that looks promising, a hunch that feels too perfect to be wrong. From alchemists trying to transmute lead into gold, to early doctors draining blood to balance the humors, people have long believed in ideas we now know to be false. The line between mistake and malpractice can be thin. Take phrenology. The 19th century believed that you could read a person's character by the shape of their skull. It was presented with charts, measurements, and data, the trappings of science, and for a while it was taken seriously by otherwise rational people. It wasn't just a silly fad, it shaped hiring decisions, criminal justice, and education policy, all from a completely wrong premise. Take N-rays, for example, a peculiar chapter in early 20th century physics. In 1903, French physicist René Prosper Blanla, a member of the prestigious French Academy of Sciences, announced he discovered a new type of radiation. These so-called N-rays, named after Nancy, the city where he worked, were said to be emitted by most substances, except for green wood and certain metals, and could supposedly enhance visibility under certain conditions. Other scientists quickly joined in. Over 100 papers were published in just a couple of years, all claiming to confirm the phenomena. N-rays were described as faint glows and subtle effects, visible only under specific dim conditions, usually with the eye alone, no independent instruments involved. As a result, the observations were highly subjective, relying heavily on suggestion. Then came American physicist Robert W. Wood, a renowned skeptic and expert in optical illusions. Visiting Blondlot's lab, Wood quietly removed a critical component from the apparatus, a prism that was supposedly splitting the N-rays. Blondlot and his assistants still claimed to see the effect, even though the device was no longer functioning. The illusion had persisted entirely through expectation and confirmation bias. N-rays vanished from serious discourse almost overnight, though I remember hearing about them in regard to folks thinking they could see auras when I was a kid, but they remained a cautionary tale, not of malicious fraud, but of how the scientific method can be derailed when pressure or the desire to believe overwhelms skepticism, as well as our ability to still see what we expect to see even when not there anymore. Even well-meaning researchers can fool themselves, and each other, if the tools of science are not paired with rigorous doubt. For futurists, N-rays are a sobering reminder. Popular support and scientific credentials do not make something real. 100 papers repeating the same falsehood do not turn it into truth. When we're evaluating new claims about AI, fusion, longevity, cosmology, string theory, new particles, room temperature superconductors, or any other frontier technology, we should remember the lessons of the N-rays and always ask, what would it take to prove this wrong? If N-rays showed us how easily the scientific elite can be fooled, then the snake oil era shows us how easily the public can be sold a fantasy. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, long before the FDA and double-blind trials, the marketplace was flooded with miracle tonics, secret formulas, and cure-alls for everything from headaches to hair loss. I am not a universal fan of the FDA, but they definitely have a role in protecting us from bad and dangerous products. Many came with scientific-sounding endorsements and lists of impressive ingredients, though these are often invented or misleading. Snake oil and the selling of science. Not all medicine bottles held medicine, some just held hope, and a little turpentine. The phrase snake oil today conjures up images of hucksters and conmen. In fact, Chinese water snake oil, used for centuries in traditional Chinese medicine, contains high levels of omega-3 fatty acids, particularly EPA, which we now know can help reduce inflammation. The story goes that Chinese immigrant workers brought this remedy to America in the 1800s, using it to soothe aches after long days building the Transcontinental Railroad. Its actual effectiveness might be exaggerated, but there was something real there, and unfortunately the version that arose in the US lacked that, as they were often substituting rattlesnake oil, which contains far fewer beneficial compounds, or abandoning snake oil altogether in favor of ingredients like mineral oil, beef fat, capsaicin, and turpentine. One of the most infamous was Clark Stanley, the self-proclaimed rattlesnake king. His traveling show featured dramatic demonstrations, slaughtering snakes on stage, boiling them down on the spot, and bottling the medicine for eager audiences. One should always reserve a little extra doubt for any product that needs to move around to new spots regularly to see why they need to move. His product, Stanley's snake oil liniment, was wildly popular until 1917, when federal inspectors analyzed it under the newly enacted Pure Food and Drug Act. The test revealed zero snake oil, leading to Stanley's modest fine, and the transformation of snake oil from healing remedy to a metaphor for medical fraud. Around the same time, the market became saturated with so-called Indian remedies, including products branded as Seneca oil or Indian liniment, often adorned with feathers or tribal imagery. While some reference the Seneca people, members of the Iroquois Confederacy known for herbal knowledge, these too were mostly cynical marketing ploys. There was also the Seneca oil spring in Pennsylvania, where petroleum seeped from the ground and was sold as a remedy from everything from arthritis to baldness. These associations lent an exotic and natural appeal to the products, even though the ingredients were simply crude oil. This was before the FDA, when virtually anyone could bottle a concoction, slap on a scientific or mystical label, and sell it as a cure-all. Advertisements for these medicines filled newspapers, trains, and town squares. They claimed to treat almost any ailment, usually with a blend of alcohol, opium, cocaine, and a healthy dose of placebo. Results varied, and as you might guess, many patients quite liked the concoctions. To the modern mind, it's tempting to laugh at these tonics and tinctures, but their success reveals a deeper truth. People weren't just gullible, they were desperate. In an age of high mortality and limited medical knowledge, a persuasive pitch in a glass bottle offer something that doctors often couldn't: hope, control, and even relief, however fleeting or dangerous. For futurists, this era reminds us that technology doesn't sell itself, stories do, and when science is young, unregulated, or poorly understood, those stories can twist the truth into whatever shape sells best. Just as today's supplement industry thrives on poorly vetted claims, yesterday's snake oil thrived in a space between medicine and mythology, where the illusion of science could be more profitable than the real thing. These early examples show us something crucial: science is not immune to groupthink, hype, or human error, and the more promising or exciting a discovery seems, the more likely people are to suspend disbelief. That's a lesson futurists in particular must remember, because we are often in the business of talking about things that have not happened yet, and wishful thinking can be just as dangerous as deliberate deceit. Pseudoscience in the 20th century, when institutions get it wrong. While snake oil salesmen exploited the public, other forms of scientific fraud came from inside the ivory tower. The 20th century brought a massive expansion of scientific institutions, labs, universities, national research programs, and with it, a new breed of pseudoscience. These weren't just mistakes made in dusty corners of academia. Some were shaped or shielded by national pride, politics, or ideology. And in some cases, entire governments bought into bad science because it served a narrative. Here things can be doubly dangerous, as you can often have bad or even atrocious policy that's based on mostly good science, at least initially. And we looked at that recently with the case of eugenics and its role in early transhumanism. Another example comes from the USSR, Lysenkoism. In the 1930s, Soviet agronomist Trofim Lysenko rejected Mendelian genetics in favor of a discredited theory akin to Lamarckism, the belief that organisms could inherit traits acquired during their parents' lifetimes. In short form, the broader appeal of Lysenkoism was ideological. Many saw it as a perfect metaphor for the communist vision of reshaping people and plants alike through environment and effort. Lysenko's ideas gained the backing of Joseph Stalin, and soon they were state doctrine. Scientists who disagreed were silenced, some imprisoned and sent to die in the Gulag like Nikolai Vavilov. Genetics was declared a bourgeois pseudoscience, and decades of Soviet agricultural and biological science were derailed. Crops failed, food shortages worsened, and the USSR fell behind in critical fields like molecular biology. Another quieter example was polywater in the 1960s, a supposed new state of water with unusual properties like higher viscosity and boiling point. The idea emerged from legitimate research. As more labs tried to replicate it, excitement built. Some even speculated it could revolutionize chemistry or be weaponized. But in reality, the mysterious properties were due to contamination. Traces of organic material like sweat, skin cells, and even detergent residue from lab glassware. Once again, the allure of a big discovery outpaced the rigor of skepticism. Even in more democratic settings, science hasn't been immune to ideological distortion. During the Cold War, funding priorities shaped what got researched and how results were interpreted. Researchers knew that work related to nuclear weapons or spaceflight was far more likely to attract government support. Later, nuclear power would become something of a boogeyman, with many scientists avoiding the field altogether due to public and political backlash, and many more hiding their personal support for nuclear energy. As for spaceflight, there are plenty of valid reasons to agree or disagree with figures like Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, or Richard Branson, but personal opinions about these individuals should not dictate whether someone supports space exploration or development more broadly, and yet for many people it does impact their attitude. While I am certainly glad to see more support for space initiatives, we should never base our enthusiasm for scientific or technological progress on whether we like or dislike the people funding or promoting it. Science should be judged by its merits, not the popularity or controversy of its advocates. For futurists, these stories offer more than just caution. They reveal structural weaknesses in the way scientific consensus is built. It's tempting to think of science as an incorruptible force, a self-correcting machine, but it is a human institution, prone to fads, politics, and even fear. When a government, corporation, or scientific establishment has too much skin in the game, skepticism becomes dangerous, and wishful thinking gets institutionalized. And this sets the stage for our next case, a moment when national attention, media hype, and a thirst for breakthrough energy solutions collide in what may be the most famous scientific false start of the 20th century: cold fusion. Cold fusion, a hot mess of hype and hope. Some discoveries make the cover of Time magazine before they make it through peer review. That is usually a bad sign. In March of 1989, two electrochemists from the University of Utah, Martin Fleischmann and Stanley Pons, announced to the world that they had achieved the impossible, nuclear fusion in a jar. According to them, they had discovered a way to produce fusion energy at room temperature using palladium electrodes and heavy water, what would come to be called cold fusion. Heavy water, by the way, is water where one or both of the hydrogen atoms in the water is a hydrogen isotope instead, like deuterium with a proton and neutron, instead of just a proton, making it a bit denser or heavier than normal water. This is naturally occurring, but you can centrifuge water to get higher concentrations. Deuterium is critical to fusion research and to nuclear process in general. Sometimes folks mistakenly assume heavy water is a fake thing, like the polywater we discussed earlier. Fusion, of course, is the holy grail of energy. It powers the sun and promises virtually limitless clean power, if we can ever control it. But until that point, fusion had only been achieved under extreme conditions, millions of degrees in tokamaks and hydrogen bombs. Cold fusion would change everything. Cheap, small-scale, low-radiation energy production that could, in theory, power cities or spaceships alike. And unlike hot fusion, it would be achievable with relatively low-tech equipment. It was the ultimate science headline. Unfortunately, that's all it ever really was. Fleischmann and Pons bypassed the usual scientific publication route, instead announcing their findings in a press conference, pushed to by the university's PR department. To be fair, such a discovery, if true, is well worth rushing out. Other labs scrambled to replicate the results. A few initially claimed success, but those early replications quickly evaporated under scrutiny. The experiments were plagued with vague measurement protocols, uncontrolled variables, and misinterpretation of heat outputs. Independent labs couldn't reproduce the results, and within months, the excitement turned into embarrassment. By the end of 1989, major scientific organizations like the U.S. Department of Energy and the American Physical Society declared there was no compelling evidence for cold fusion. The scientific community moved on, but the public memory lingered, and so did a stubborn core of cold fusion enthusiasts who insisted the mainstream had shut it down too quickly or even conspired to hide it. I doubt it did much to help the public's trust in nuclear energy either. To this day, cold fusion research limps along in small, often self-funded circles, occasionally rebranded as low-energy nuclear reactions, LENR, to dodge the stigma. Some of the researchers are sincere and methodical, others veer closer to their free energy crowd. Meanwhile, mainstream fusion research, hot fusion, continues through projects like ITAR and the National Ignition Facility, but sadly with far less public visibility and trust than if cold fusion had simply remained frozen in skepticism. Today we're looking at a lot of scientific scams and bad science from the 19th century to present, but there's one major one we are not covering today, often known as the scientific Watergate. In 17 pages, we have a grippy new Nebula original documentary that deep dives one of the most controversial science ethics cases of the 20th century, uncovering a tangled story of politics, power, and perception. It's a poignant reminder of how bias in politics shape even our deepest truths. Enjoy a wonderful mix of historical analysis, science, and investigative storytelling as we explore a scandal that rocked the scientific and medical worlds. Watch 17 pages and more only on Nebula, where every episode of SFIA airs early and ad-free, along with dozens of our Nebula exclusive episodes and more exclusive content from other creators, including Nebula originals like 17 pages. Use my link go.nebula.tv/IsaacArthur to get 40% off. That's just $36 a year or $3 a month. Scan the QR code or click the link below to start watching now. For futurists, cold fusion is a painful lesson in how media hype, institutional urgency, and wishful thinking can short-circuit the scientific process. It's one of the reasons I tend to be skeptical of any newly hyped physics theory, whether it's a proposed new particle or a bold new cosmology, even when I, personally, find the idea exciting. These theories often get sold to the public as the next big breakthrough, even though many never make it past the hypothesis stage. That not only leads to disillusionment, but also fosters the mistaken belief that science is constantly rewriting its basic rules. In truth, physics has rarely needed to revise its core principles. Big shifts tend to be careful addendums every decade or so, not sweeping revolutions every month. There was no scam involved with the GPS calculational error that led some to believe we'd found superluminal neutrinos. nor with many of the proposed dark matter particles or alternatives like MOND, modified Newtonian dynamics, that simply didn't pan out. But public enthusiasm often outpaces the evidence, and when theories fall short, people become jaded. That disillusionment can swing too far the other way as well. Promising theories can be unfairly dismissed due to past disappointments, controversy, or even personal dislike of the scientists involved. I am reminded of the particularly harsh criticism aimed at proponents of the steady-state universe when they suggest that new hydrogen might spontaneously appear to allow new stars to form in an eternal universe, an idea that was widely mocked, and yet not long after, dark energy was proposed, which involves something remarkably similar, the universe expanding via a form of energy that seems to emerge everywhere all the time. Of course, dark energy has faced plenty of criticism too, both fair and unfair, but the lesson remains. Good science isn't about whether a theory sounds strange or comes from an unpopular idea. It's about how well it stands up to scrutiny. Even for things like perpetual motion machines, which tend to be scams more often than mistakes, we mustn't automatically rule out future inventions purporting it, albeit I think we're fine to follow the US Patent Office's rules. If you submit a patent application for a perpetual motion machine, you must include a working model or prototype to accompany your patent claim if the invention appears to violate the laws of physics, particularly the first or second law of thermodynamics. In a world hungry for breakthrough solutions, especially for something as consequential as energy, even well-meaning scientists can get swept up in the race to be first. It's worth noting that Fleischmann and Pons weren't scam artists in the traditional sense. They weren't selling snake oil or manipulating data for money. They were respected researchers, perhaps overconfident in their results, certainly unwise in how they presented them, but not evil. They believed. They thought they had something to benefit all mankind, and the sooner, the better. I don't think that's been true of many of their successors in that research, but then I don't know many personally. But that may be the most dangerous kind of scientific scam, the one wrapped not in greed, but in good intentions, because it's not just about being wrong, it's about creating a wave of expectations that diverts attention, funding, and public trust. For several years after 1989, cold fusion muddied the waters of fusion research, contributing to a climate of skepticism and defunding that still echoes today. And it doesn't just hurt scientists, it hurts us, the public. If every new headline promises revolutionary tech that never arrives, people eventually stop believing that any of it is real. Cold fusion, like so many of the scams and flops we've looked at, teaches a hard truth. You cannot shortcut the process just because the destination is exciting. As futurists, we should remain open to radical possibilities, but we must demand rigorous standards for evidence. Otherwise, we risk falling for the next miracle energy source, or whatever breakthrough claim comes wrapped in high hopes and poor methodology. The future may be bright, but it still needs to pass peer review. And even then, peer review hasn't been without its flaws and failings either. When data looks perfect and the name is prestigious, even top journals can nod politely as a con job walks in wearing a lab coat. In the early 2000s, physicist Jan Hendrik Schoen published a flurry of astonishing results in top journals like Nature and Science, claiming breakthroughs in molecular electronics. His data looked too perfect, and it was. Schoen had fabricated the results, but peer reviewers assumed the work had been vetted by his prestigious employer, Bell Labs. Over 24 papers were eventually retracted, exposing a stunning failure of both peer review and institutional trust. Twin physicists Igor and Grika Bogdanov managed to publish several papers in theoretical physics journals that were, on closer inspection, pure mathematical gibberish. The content was so obscure and jargon-heavy that reviewers either didn't understand it or didn't want to admit they couldn't. It became a textbook example of how peer review can be dazzled by dense language and academic credentials, even when the science is nonsense. I won't comment on the publish or perish environment in general, beyond that I don't think it encourages either good science or good scientists, and puts a lot of unnecessary and unproductive stress on a lot of good researchers. I have a lot of negative views on things like tenure and universities in general these days, and some of which are probably not entirely fair. I'm also very worried about AI getting used to help do peer review, which can probably be very helpful, but as with everything involving AI these days, think of it as a handy intern full of enthusiasm, often useful and prone to making big mistakes if you make the mistake of relying on it too much. Also sometimes stoned and prone to hallucination. It's not hard for me to imagine tons of bad science sneaking through peer review, where the reviewers are mostly letting their AI do the reviewing. The line between progress and pitfall, So, what can we take from all this? That science is broken? Hardly. Science remains one of the greatest engines for truth and progress humanity has ever created. But it is a human institution. That means it's vulnerable to all the same flaws we are: pride, greed, wishful thinking, laziness, group pressure, and good intentions gone astray. And we all know where roads paved with good intentions tend to stray. What distinguishes real science from pseudoscience isn't the presence of error. Mistakes are inevitable, but the willingness to correct them, to demand rigor, replication, and transparency. Peer review is not perfect. Institutions can fail, but these are the guardrails we've built to keep us from plunging off the intellectual cliffs of history. They may not be perfect, but they are the best tools we currently have, and far better than having none at all. That's also why futurism has to walk a narrow path. On one side lies blind optimism, falling for every shiny new claim that promises to rewrite the laws of physics. On the other lies hardened cynicism, where nothing new is ever trusted and every innovation is dismissed as a scam. The challenge is to believe in possibilities without abandoning skepticism. I am often described as an optimist, which still surprises me a little. I used to call myself a pragmatic optimist, and frankly, I was usually seen as more of a cynic by my friends and peers, both at university and in the military, which is hardly noted for its glowing optimism either. My motto back then, and still now, is the popular idiom: hope for the best, prepare for the worst. That way, you're rarely disappointed and often pleasantly surprised. My upbeat view of the future does not come from rose-colored glasses. It comes from the belief that we can overcome obstacles, and that we should face the unknown with a mindset of trust but verify. There's always another cold fusion or N-ray waiting around the corner, another charismatic thinker or slick demo video offering the next miracle engine, memory crystal, or mind upload breakthrough. But if scientific scams of the past teach us anything, it's that real progress takes time, patience, and more than a few dead ends along the way. So let's not lose hope, or trust, or curiosity. Let's just make sure the future we're building is not grounded in wishful thinking, but in good science. As always, thanks for watching, and have a great week.